Yeah. Hey, what's up, everybody? Yeah, I wasn't gonna do it again. I was like, nah, let me just finish the presentation. Man, you know what? Whatever just happened, if you're just tuning in, if you're catching this at a later date, this is actually a continuation of the previous part 4 of Nations of the World. Make sure you catch that. It's right before this upload. I got cut off live. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but my computer just all of a sudden just froze. Never happened before, making this weird sound, and then it just restarted on its own. And that was weird, very weird. Me, I'm the type of person to jump into conspiracy theories, but hey, man, I can't prove it, right? But hey, it was just weird. I don't trust it. We were vibing. I had a lot of people tuned in. We were getting to good parts where we had made all the connections, and they don't want to hear this stuff, man. They want to cut it off. They want to do everything. I don't know how they do that, but that's some crazy technology to make my computer restart. But yeah, we're gonna continue with the presentation. I'm gonna basically start where I was left off in the article I was reading, Community of Port Jews in the Context in the Dutch Atlantic World. Again, if you just tuning in, this video is a continuation of the part 4. I got cut off live, so I had to restart it, and we were already about an hour and a half, 2 hours in. So this is just finishing the presentation. It's the same presentation of part 4. We're just gonna finish it up. Again, we've been talking about the Sephardic Jews. They've been expelled, them and the Moors, the Muslims, and even before that, how they were living together in their little golden age during the Muslim Empire there in Spain and the Iberian Peninsula. The Jews were very successful. They were in charge of the trade and everything. We got a lot of references of them being dark-skinned, Swarti, being referenced as a general consensus in the 16th, 17th century, in those colonial times, that they were a people of color. We're talking about Sephardic Jews from the Iberian Peninsula, Spanish and Portuguese so-called Jews. All right, and they were just going all over Europe, eventually going all over the Americas, setting up shop. They were heavily involved in the sugar planting, sugar refining and industry in colonial times, setting up plantations in the Americas, first in the Madeiras and Sao Tome. They have a lot of history with the Huguenots as well. We know that a lot of the Moorish, we're going to go over it a little bit again today, right now. But in this part, again, that, a lot of the Moors that got expelled from Spain and Portugal ended up in southern France. They became known as Huguenots. Huguenots, known history of also being persecuted for their religious practices. We know that the Sephardic Jews and Moors were being called New Christians everywhere they went, new Christians. They were adopting a type of Christianity. It wasn't fully Catholicism, so a lot of them went with their Protestant-dominated countries and doing business with the Protestants. Protestants becoming very involved in the Atlantic trade as well. 17th, 16th century Atlantic trade. We got that in the last part. We're going to continue to get that again. All the correlation again. We're just going to start off with this just to refresh where we left off again. All right, and thanks for being here. You guys are the real ones. Came back. I don't expect everybody to come back, but they'll get this part again. And yeah, sorry about what happened. It was very weird. All right, very, very weird. So we're gonna continue with the presentation again. I'm not gonna try to summarize the last 2 hours, but just if you missed it, go ahead and watch part 4, the video right before this one. All right, they ain't stopping us. Hawa, much love to everybody in the chat. David, thank you for all the support, man. Blazing71, we had Con Drop earlier here. We had Anu, we had everybody. Red Wolf, Thoth, Haku, Hoya, Milton, Hydro, Harold, Hoya. Thanks for being here. We're gonna continue, right? Random people just randomly colonizing random spots and somehow randomly connecting with other countries and other places and doing business. No, it wasn't like that. It wasn't random. All right, we're starting to see a bigger picture here. So again, what I was saying is, it wasn't random that these countries were just teaming up and they was just going to these random spots in Americas and trying their luck and colonizing here. The Germans ended up here and the Portuguese got this spot. Oh, I claimed this spot. No, it wasn't so random. It was more organized. It was there's a network here of people and a lot of people with same social, cultural backgrounds. Just want to read this real quick, correlate to what we're about to start getting into. You guys probably already know. It says here, communities of Port Jews and their contacts in the Dutch Atlantic world. Port Jews and their contacts in the Dutch Atlantic world. This is Jewish History Journal article, volume 20, number 2, Port Jews of the Atlantic, 2006, page 129 to 145, about 17 pages. Of course, we ain't going to get into all that because we don't even got access to this book. We got to buy it. I didn't really want to buy this, just to read a couple pages. So we're going to just get the preview because we got other articles here. So we're just going to get the preview here real quick to correlate what we're talking about. Communities support Jews and their contacts in the Dutch Atlantic world. It says here the abstract. All right, this is from Will Kluster, Clark University, Worcester, Mass, USA. It says in the late 16th century, Jews and conversos created a trading network that tied together ports in Portugal, Brazil, and the Netherlands. All right, you see how they did that now? This network became the chief Dutch commercial circuit in the first quarter of the 17th century and offered benefits to Jews and conversos that were not solely economic ones. This circuit made it possible for Brazilians, new Christians to return to Judaism. Protestants, they went from being Sephardic, their culture, to new Christians, so-called Protestants, back to being able to be Jews again in Amsterdam, and Amsterdam Jews to establish a community in Brazil. All right, remember, you see the whole connection now in Amsterdam. These are Dutch, these are really just Sephardic Jews. In the process, the Port Jews of Recife, Brazil, and Amsterdam became closely connected. They had a connection, a global network, especially after warfare closed off access to Portuguese ports. In the network, Amsterdam Jews arrived in force and Recife during the 1630s. They started just colonizing Brazil, right? But traveled back to Amsterdam during the years 1645 and 54. They had to go back. Remember, the Dutch went over there. Since the Dutch colony in Brazil was shrinking and eventually was captured by Portuguese troops, the Portuguese recaptured it again. Jews contributed commercially, financially, and militarily to this short-lived colony and were rewarded with privileges, which for this time were remarkable. All right? A whole history they don't even teach us. They want us to think that were just white random people. And it's not even like that, right? You guys seeing what I'm showing you, right? I hope you see how deep this is. This is Port Jews, it has been said, were travelers, strangers, boundary crossers, and cultural brokers, purveyors of products between far and near. So true is this statement that Port Jews must be viewed from a perspective much like that used by practitioners of Atlantic history,
who place interconnectedness at center stage. Their studies concentrate on the flow of people, commodities, microbes, and information, and in the end, they offer a new perspective that goes beyond the traditional one of studying people in their immediate local and changes the way we understand people, communities, and nations. All right, I think they're saying what I just had said to you guys. It's bigger than that. It's just not random. It's what they're saying. It's not just random stuff. For it takes into account social, cultural, political, and economic impact over a wide area. People who are socially the same, culturally the same, politically in the same mind state. That's why they're Portuguese, Jews, German, French coming together, because they're socially the same, or culturally they might be from the same background, or political views, religious views. In our case, in particular, that of the Atlantic world. This perspective is especially useful for studying Jews and crypto Jews in the 17th century Dutch colonies of Recife in Brazil and Willemstad in Curaçao. These port Jews, par excellence, will now be at the center of this study. The Jews of New Amsterdam, who were not commercially important, and the Jews of Suriname, who settled in the New World expressly in order to engage in plantation agriculture, will not be discussed. All right, so they're just letting you know a little bit of drop here. All right, so now I want to get into this article. Scholarly article says here the role of Sephardic Jews in the British Caribbean area during the 17th century. All right, we already know they were the sugar planters, so we're going to get some more correlation here. This is from the Caribbean Studies Journal, Volume 4, Number 3, from October 1964, pages 32 to 49. It's about 18 pages. See how much we can get in today. This is the article right here by Gordon Merrill. The role of Sephardic Jews, Sephardis, all right, people of color. All right, and it says down here in the second paragraph, we're going to begin. It says the transformation of almost uninhabited islands in the Caribbean from a state of nature to agricultural colonies producing sugar for a distant market took place within the remarkably short span of 50 years in the 17th century. All right, so here what they're saying, they grabbed these islands who were very natural and beautiful, probably had a lot of indigenous vegetation, animals, and people, and they turned them into basically sugar producing markets for a distant market for people, for foreign people. What happened to all the local stuff? The accomplishment is even more surprising. All right, listen to this. When it is realized that neither the English planter nor the African slave had any significant previous experience with sugarcane agriculture and the system of sugar manufacture. Okay, there was no African slave brought over here to grow sugar. They didn't know anything about sugar growing. It wasn't them, and it wasn't no English white man planter. Letting you know straight up, there's major drop right here. All right, we should have already concluded that as we're learning, watching this video today, right? Where's the Africans in all of this? Get what I'm saying? They're telling you right here too the same thing. All right. However, Brazil was an important producer of sugar, but somebody was doing it, because Brazil was an important producer of sugar during the early decades of the 17th century, and it is illogical to look for influences from that quarter. All right, so who was running things in that quarter? This is what he's letting you know. It is sometimes claimed that Portuguese Jews from Brazil were no innovators of change in these British colonies during the 17th century, bringing capital, trading skills, slaves, and much needed experience in sugarcane agriculture and sugar manufacture at a critical time in the development of the colonies. This article attempts to establish the facts in order to draw a recent conclusion on the role of the Sephardic Jews in this part of the world during the 17th century, who's running things, who's really setting up shop and helping all these empires grow. Sephardic Jews and their trade and merchandise skills and their growing agricultural skills too with the sugar, their knowledge with the sugar plantations. All right, Sephardic Jews. The curiosity of the writer concerning the Sephardic Jews was aroused in 1952 on first examining the dozen or so remaining tombstones in an unkept Jewish cemetery on Nevis. All right, Nevis, remember Alexander Hamilton? He was a Jewish. Again, he was a Sephardic Jew. That's why we already know Alexander Hamilton, a person of color. Again, they were calling him a Negro, mulatto, Swarty. They were calling him all these things. We got the video already. All right, he was Huguenot and Sephardic Jew. Huguenot and Sephardic Jew. It boils down to almost the same thing. The dates of burial were from 1660 to 1725. Richard Pates, in his authoritative book on Nevis, recorded the commercial activity of the Portuguese Jews on the island during that period. Long abandoned burial grounds for these folks exist on the other islands in the Lesser Antilles, and Jewish synagogues have survived into the 20th century of Barbados and Jamaica. All right, so this Jewish cemeteries, again, Alexander Hamilton's ancestors are buried in these Jewish cemeteries, and we got the video and explaining that and showing that. All right, so they're all over these places in Barbados as well, in Jamaica as well. The immediate place of origin of the Jews was Brazil. Most of them had to come out of Brazil, but out of Brazil they had to come originally from Amsterdam or directly from Spain or Portugal, being exiled, or from other countries they were exiled in. So a whole history here, right? So they was from Brazil, from which they fled in the middle of the 17th century in order to escape religious persecution. The ultimate origin of these folks lies in the Mediterranean world. Persecution and forced migration of the Sephardic Jews began in Spain in 1478 with the establishment of the Inquisition. A similar experience of forced migration awaited them in Brazil almost 200 years later. Although the major aim of this paper is to throw whatever light is possible on the role of the Sephardic Jews in the British colonies of the Caribbean, it is necessary to sketch in their background in Europe and in Brazil, and the organization of the paper is to that end. All right, so very scholarly to do that. He's basically saying he's going to do what I'm basically trying to do. I went back, you know, when I did my Sephardi video, I'm still learning. I'm trying to figure out who these guys are. But even though we know they do have some kind of Hebrew, might have Israelite, Edomite, Moabite blood, Canaanite blood in them, Ishmaelite blood in them, Arabs, they have some kind of Jewish, and they are related to some people in Asia Minor, the original Sephardi area over there. I think that's what he's about to get into. It says European background. It says Sephardic Jews have a long, at times illustrious history in Europe. Semitic traders from Sidon and Tyre traveled the length of the Mediterranean world in classical times and settled on the distant Iberian shores. The Jews were influential during the Roman period, but they enjoyed a truly golden age under the Moors. All right? What? We got this a lot in my past videos, Columbus and his Negro friends. We also got it in the Moorish videos I made. No more hijack, no more misunderstanding. The Sephardic Jews actually were very prosperous. That was their golden age time too, under the Moors, when they were free to move within Muslim world in search of economic and intellectual gains. They became rich, aristocratic, learned, haughty, and powerful. The Sephardic Jews and the Moors, they were together, is what I showed you. Eventually, the name Sepharad, the original was over there, came to be applied by the Hebrews to the kingdoms of Castilla, Navarra, Aragon, and Portugal. And Jews of Spain and Portuguese origin became known as Sephardic Jews. All right, again, people of color living prosperous under the Moors, their brothers and cousins. In contrast to the Ashkenazim, all right, it's different. All right, listen to this. Sephardic Jews, in contrast to the Ashkenazims or European Jews of Slavonic origin, they're different. All right, you were blaming these people this whole time. You were picturing these Ashkenazi European Jews of Slavonic origin. That's what you were always picturing. And it was actually the Sephardic Jews living under the Moors, prosperous, their brothers, right? A lot of them related, it was actually them setting up shop, colonizing over here first. Sephardic Jews adopted a veneer of Christianity under the compulsion of the Inquisition. So they adopted Christianity, right? They had to become what? Presbyterians, Protestants, Quakers, Baptists, all right? These new Christians. And those who emigrated to the New World were termed New Christians, like I just said, appropriately and disapprovingly by the Spanish chroniclers. The Sephardic Jews were archly conservative in outlook, preserving the intellectual traditions that had evolved in Moorish Spain and North Africa. They invited the attention of bigots in an age of religious intolerance. The conservatism of the Sephardim is still to be observed in the 20th century in the attachment to a particular pronunciation of Hebrew and in the instinctive preference for an unchanging simplicity of service in the synagogue. Furthermore, congregations of Spanish Jews in the United States who have been away from Spain for centuries are said to retain to the present time the Spanish language. In the Middle Ages, Spain and Portugal, in somewhat contrasting ways, attempted to solve the problem posed by these rich, influential folk of unpopular belief, and in so doing, Portugal in particular produced a number of new Christians prepared to throw off the cloak of new religion at the first opportunity. All right, who these people were, what is their history. We eventually got all this, but it was important to know, like I did showed in my video, that they were merchants and they were traders from way back, from ancient times. They had all the routes. That's why it was natural for them to become the merchants in the sea. You get what I'm saying? These Marranos, especially when they were under the Moors, right? The Moors going around, these old school Phoenicians, influencing these old school Danites. All right, so continue a little further. This article says at the beginning of the 16th century, Spain and Portugal contained no practicing Jews, only new Christians or Marranos. All right, they had to practice in secret, as they were known in the Iberian Peninsula. Although they were forbidden to leave their homelands, lest they discard the new religion before the long, Marrano fugitives began to appear in other parts of Europe. Many of them reached the Low Countries of Northern Europe in the late 15th, 16th century, where they maintained an outward attachment to Christianity. All right, what is that? Protestantism. Portuguese Marrano communities at home played an important role in overseas trade and enjoyed connections with new Christian communities abroad that were starting to establish their network. By way of example, the great Marrano mercantile House of Mendes, which held the coveted pepper monopoly, all but rivaled the Fuggers at one time in the extent and importance of its transactions. In 1512, the House of Mendes established its Antwerp branch. Antwerp, remember that? An indication of the network of international financial power in the hands of the Portuguese Jews. Amsterdam and Antwerp became centers of Marrano population and power during the 16th century. Centers. Who was running stuff in Amsterdam and who was there? Also Huguenots, right? Remember, we're going to get into that again. The Inquisition was established in Portugal in 1531, and new Christians from their south a refuge in northern Europe. The trickle of fugitives became a flood after the declaration of Dutch independence in 1579, which brought the expectation of full religious freedom. Within a few years, Marranos settled in Amsterdam as Jews, and they were joined by many others from Antwerp who threw off the cloak of secrecy and openly practiced Judaism. Amsterdam eventually had over 4,000 Sephardic Jews and gained the title of the Dutch Jerusalem. It is noteworthy that until the establishment of the State of Israel, Amsterdam remained the spiritual center of Sephardic Jewish communities scattered throughout the world. You hear that? Amsterdam, Dutch. During this period, England remained close to Sephardic refugees. At this point, it is useful to turn to the entry of these folk into Brazil, from which they later spread into the Caribbean area and North America. All right, so see what we're getting into, right? It says number 2, the entry of Sephardic Jews into the New World. Spain and Portugal sought by legislation to keep their colonies in the New World free of Jews and new Christians. Persecution at home and the magnet of trading opportunity abroad encouraged these folks to work against that policy. Many succeeded, for such restrictive laws are difficult to enforce in any age. Furthermore, it appears that official policy did not remain unshaken over the centuries involved. From time to time, new Christians were able to secure the suspension of the restrictive laws by purchase. For example, in 1509, an agreement was reached in Seville between the conversos and the crown, whereby new Christians were permitted to go to the colonies for purposes of trade periods not exceeding 2 years on payment of a fee of 20,000 ducats. Also, it appears that on occasion, officialdom wavered in its basic policy and permitted new Christians to emigrate to the colonies, probably in recognition of the need for colonists. So they were making deals with them, like I was saying earlier, right? In any event, facts speak clearly. Thousands of Sephardic Jews managed by legal means or otherwise to reach the New World as new Christians. Thousands. Life had been subject to suspicion and intrigue for the secret Jews in Portugal. The Inquisitions of Lisbon, Coimbra, and Evora held 47 great autos de fe between 1612 and 1630, and this feverish activity against the secret Jew provided the motive to illegal emigration. The Inquisition went to astounding lengths to identify the non-believers and to save their souls at the expense of their lives. The religious quality of the blood was examined and classified by the agents of the Inquisition with obvious zeal. Heretics were judged to be full, 3/4, 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, partly or more than partly New Christians. The attraction of a freer society in the New World must have been great for these Jews. Recife in northern Brazil fell to the Dutch in 1630. Within 6 years, Dutch control extended from Rio San Francisco in the south to the captaincy of Maranhão in the north, and the Dutch colony became known as New Holland. All right, New Holland in Brazil. There was a considerable amount of religious toleration in a population that contained Dutch Protestants. All right, there we go, Protestants. Who's these Protestants? Huguenots, right? Portuguese Catholics, New Christians, professing Jews, native Indians, and Negro slaves. A lot of these people are the same. In 1634, the State General issued a proclamation guaranteeing Jews and Catholics the free practice of their religion without investigation of their conscience or their home. Under these circumstances, the Marranos threw off the cloak of Christianity and openly embraced their own religion. They were joined by numerous Jewish immigrants from Holland, and in 1640, the Jewish inhabitants of Recife were said to be more numerous than the Christians. By 1654, the city is reported to have had 5,000 Jewish inhabitants. Attention is now directed to the economic activities of these folks. Contemporary accounts are not numerous, but John Neuhoff has left a rather detailed account of New Holland, which he visited in 1643. Neuhoff was impressed by the sugar industry in the colony, to the point of proclaiming that no other place in the West Indies could enter the industry with any prospect of profit. As for the Jewish inhabitants, he wrote, all right, among the free inhabitants of Brazil that were not in the company's service, Dutch West India Company, the Jews were the most considerable in number, who had transported themselves thither from Holland. They came from Holland. Who were these Holland Jews? They were Sephardic Portuguese people of color. They had a vast traffic beyond all the rest. They purchased sugar mills and built stately houses in the Recife. They were all traders, which could have been of great consequence to the Dutch Brazil had they kept themselves within the due bounds of traffic. All right, and continuing a little bit ahead, it says, during the course of the struggle by the Portuguese. All right, so remember what's going on. I know it's a lot of info, guys. I don't know if you guys are bored or not, but I hope you guys are enjoying this information. You know, I just, for me, putting it all together, it's just, I'm just like, wow. You know, I just wanted everybody to see this information and kind of like get a whole background behind it, you know, a real historical background of who these people are and everything. It's not just labels like Portuguese, Jews, Dutch, you know, these are people, there's backgrounds behind these people, you know. It's like they call anybody an American today, right? Is everybody indigenous to America that they're being called American, you know? So just like these people, they might be called Dutch, they might be called French, but a lot of them are Sephardic Jews or Muslim Moors from Spain and Portugal. All right, this is the what I'm trying to show in this particular study, the presentation. And it says here, you know, that, you know, the Dutch had control of Brazil for a bit. You know, they had taken it from the Portuguese, and, you know, Jews were like, yeah, you know, we get to be Jews again and everything. So eventually the Portuguese regained control of Brazil, or this part. So what happened? Many Jews basically became convinced that for their own safety, they should move to neighboring colonies, such as Cayenne and Suriname. The fall of Recife in 1654, so that's when the Portuguese took over again. Thousands of Jews were given 3 months to leave Brazil or suffer the consequences of open adherence to Judaism and Catholic calling. Now remember, even though a lot of these are originally Portuguese people that they're calling Jews, and it's Portugal who's taking the control. Remember, these are Portuguese Catholic Empire now. This is the Portuguese Catholic Empire, and who are most likely people of color too. It's not like, you know, we're talking about the Holy Roman Empire. Remember, that was Charles V who was doing that against the Protestant faith and Jews and Moors, Muslims. So they were given 3 months to leave, these Jews in Brazil, or suffer the consequences of open adherence to Judaism and Catholic colony. These were the events that linked together all the Sephardic Jewish communities scattered throughout the Caribbean region during the 17th and 18th centuries. So again, they'll say that, you know, if they didn't come directly from Holland or from Portugal, Spain, these Sephardic Jews, In history, they'll tell us, well, they came from Brazil. And now we know the whole background of how they got to Brazil, who are these people, and what happened, and how they ended up in these other islands in the Caribbean, like Nevis, Jamaica, Suriname, Trinidad. Eventually, descendants of these folk established Sephardic communities and seaports along the Atlantic seaboard of North America. Eventually, where did they end up? In North America, and along where? The Atlantic seaboard. I want to South Carolina, right? Particularly in the cities of Providence, Newport, and New York. All right, you see? Providence, Newport, and New York. Rhode Island, Newport, New Jersey, or New York, and then New York, right? It's convenient at this point in the narrative to pause and to consider the prospects of that faced the Portuguese Jews about to leave Brazil. The vast majority of these folks sought and eventually gained entry into English-speaking lands. Public opinion in England at that time was against permitting Jews to enter the country. The story began to circulate in England in 1649 that the Jews had offered to buy St. Paul's Cathedral and the Bodleian Library, inconceivable as truth but well designed to increase the blood pressure of patriotic Englishmen. During the Protectorate, Oliver Cromwell displayed religious toleration in advance of his times and probably some appreciation of potential economic development in allowing some Jews to enter the country. They were Sephardic Jews, but more probably from Amsterdam than from Brazil. Cromwell met the question of Jewish immigration into England obliquely by failing to pronounce a course political action not unknown in the 20th century. It worked to the advantage of the Jews in that they were not singled out for special taxation. It was not until later in the 17th century that the legal rights to reside and trade in England was restored to them. In contrast, the colonial authorities in England were well disposed toward the entry of Jewish refugees from Brazil into the colonies of the Caribbean region. At the same time, the Dutch authorities encouraged Jewish migration to their mainland and inland colonies lying to the north of Brazil. For their part, the Jews, with experience as traders and planters, with capital and slaves, were anxious to carry on with a lucrative enterprise in sugar. Accordingly, within the space of a few years, Portuguese Jews became residents of the Guiana coast and the various islands from the mainland Suriname to Jamaica, where they engaged in trading and agricultural pursuits. All right, so you see how they're populating the rest of the Caribbean and eventually into North America.
All right. So yeah, that was another part of the presentation. Again, thanks for everybody that came back. Again, we're doing part two. This was supposed to be a complete presentation, just in one part, but I guess it was long enough. Um, so we're gonna continue here. They ain't stopping us, but yeah, it was some kind of weird how I got interrupted. That's never happened before. I don't know, it was really weird. But we're gonna continue the presentation. I hope you guys see how, from watching the other part we did earlier, in this part, that there's like a whole global network going on here. And again, the Huguenots, they have like almost the same kind of history, and they're in the same places doing the same thing, being persecuted the same way, doing business the same way. They're also merchants. All right, and we already got the reference earlier that a lot of the Moors, after they got expelled from Spain, ended up in southern France, and they were eventually became Huguenots. All right, so we're going to continue with the presentation. Thanks for everybody that tuned in. Again, if you're new, you just came in, we were live earlier and I got cut off. And so make sure to catch that part as well. It goes with this part, together. So yeah, much love and respect to everybody in the chat.
All right, so I hope you guys following along. So far, see the similarities within these people. We know that the Sephardi Jews, a lot of them ended up and were very successful in their commerce and business in Holland and the Dutch Republic. Which also happened to be one of the places where the Huguenots were able to go after they were refugees and become very successful too. As it says here from the Brigham Young University, Le Grand Arch des Fugitives, Huguenots in the Dutch Republic after 1685 by Michael Joseph Walker from the Brigham Young University, Provo. And right here, page 14 of this book, article says resettlement in the Netherlands was somewhat more successful for the Huguenots than in the British Isles. and both locations were the most receptive as compared to anywhere else because of cultural and linguistic structures provided by the pre-existing Walloon churches. The greater number of Huguenots settled in the Dutch Republic as opposed to any other single place. In the Netherlands, the Huguenots retained their separate culture and identity for the longest time of any of the areas of resettlement, arguably into the 19th century. However, they also managed to be integrated into Dutch society. The Huguenots were attractive to the Dutch because of their skills importing in the Dutch economy. Doesn't that sound like how they were also allowing the Sephardic Jews to settle in Amsterdam and all these places because they were going to be so important to the economy as well? And also their Reformed religion, which matched so well the religion of the Dutch Reformed Church. Indeed, the Dutch communities to which the Huguenots fled greatly benefited from the additional talent, wealth, and devotion these refugees brought and generated refugees, just like Sephardic Jews. Alice Clare Carter suggests that the Dutch readily accepted and invited skilled, talented, or wealthy foreigners. She argues that while other countries were rejecting religious diversity, the Netherlands, especially Amsterdam, embraced the skilled individuals who helped create the Dutch Golden Age, regardless of religious confession. However, the religious confession of the Huguenots happened to match very closely the sentiments of the Dutch Reformed Church, making them even more attractive than other sorts of refugees. Amsterdam was a city where toleration flourished. Remember that Amsterdam, many Sephardic Jews were prospering there and had control of the commerce in Amsterdam. And also, so these Huguenots, if they wanted to do business, they had to do business with the Jews, basically their own people from ancient times in Spain and Portugal, and also provided a ready market for their Huguenot refugee industrial skills. The Huguenots enriched the communities where they made new homes. Their commitments to the new communities left a lasting cultural impact where they settled. In fact, the most skilled Huguenots migrated to the Netherlands because the Dutch Republic found quick use for their skills. Various cities even competed with each other in the Republic to attract the most skilled refugees. William III of Orange also encouraged the towns to support the Huguenots as part of his effort to gain political favor amongst Protestants around the Republic and England and to combat the policies of his political opponent Louis XIV. Furthermore, the states of Holland offered generous funds which also served as propaganda against France and emboldened the Dutch to help Huguenot refugees. The Dutch army also benefited from the Huguenot exodus from France, as Louis XIV had previously employed Huguenots as soldiers and officers. All right, so that was just a little quick thing. Just wanted you to see that, yeah, they were also Huguenots, just like Sephardic Jews became very prosperous and were settling in Holland and becoming Dutch citizens, all right, blending in. All right, just want to show an example of one of these Sephardic Jews that ended up in Holland and became known, became very popular there in history, and as a Dutch Jew. His name is Benedict Espinosa. We're in the Britannica.com website encyclopedia. It says Benedict Espinosa, Hebrew forename Baruch, Latin forename Benedictus, Portuguese Bento de Espinosa. Born November 24, 1632 in Amsterdam, died February 21st, 1677, The Hague. Dutch Jewish philosopher. All right, again, Dutch Jewish philosopher, one of the foremost exponents of 17th century rationalism and one of the early and seminal figures of the Enlightenment. His masterwork is the treatise Ethics from 1677. So he's a Dutch Jewish, all right? So that kind of like leaves you like, so what does that mean, So we picture a certain type of Jew, right? Every time we grow up hearing like, oh, German Jew, Dutch Jew, all right? But what is he, all right? It says early life and career. Spinoza's Portuguese parents, all right, Portuguese, the Jews of Portuguese, we already know what complexion they were, right? Very swarthy, very dark, so-called black, were among many Jews who were forcibly converted to Christianity. His parents, but continued to practice Judaism in secret. See Marranos. All right, so they were Marranos. Right, remember Marranos. All right, we went over Marranos in many of my videos, the information before. After being arrested, tortured, and condemned by the Inquisition in Portugal, they escaped to Amsterdam, where Espinosa's father, Michael, became an important merchant. He became a merchant. Remember, they're heavily involved in the merchant business, all right, in trade. These Jews, all right, since ancient times, and eventually served as one of the directors of the city's synagogue. Spinoza's mother, Hannah, died in 1638, shortly before his birthday, all right, so they were Marranos, again, Marrano, British Encyclopedia. In Spanish history, a Jew who converted to Christian faith to escape persecution, but who continued to practice Judaism secretly. Marranos, all right? Marranos. And we already know that these Jews were so-called black. All right, so Benedict, how can you prove that, Kurimeo? Because they got this fake picture of him here like they always do. All right, I'm going to show you something right here. All right, this is in archive.org. It says this is Benedict de Spinoza, His Life, Correspondence, and Ethics by Robert Willis. This is the publication date in 1870. All right, this is the title right here, Benedict de Spinoza again, by Robert Willis, MD, 1870. So we're going to go to page 71 in this book, and we're going to zoom in. And it says here, his personal appearance. All right, talking about Spinoza's personal appearance. It says in Calero's day, there were many persons still living at The Hague who had been well acquainted with Spinoza. They spoke of him as a man of middling height and slenderly built. His features were regular, his forehead broad and high, his eyes dark, large, and lustrous, his eyebrows black and bushy, his hair of the same hue, long and curly hair, and his complexion swarthy, black, so-called black, swart, black. His complexion is so-called black. All right, Benedict de Spinoza, this famous Dutch Jew, so-called Dutch Jew, is a Sephardic Jew. His parents were Portuguese. They were Iberian, Moorish Jews, right? Moorish Jews. The whole physiognomy unmistakably proclaiming descent from the Jews of the southern peninsula. He looked just like them. Remember that the Jews from the southern peninsula were people of color, so-called very dark. They were describing them earlier, right? Very dark. So his personal appearance, complexion, swarthy, show me that he was light-skinned, prove that he was pale-skinned. All right, we already know. Corroborate, put all the information together, use your logic. All right, all this info. Who were these Dutch Jews and what role did they play? Yeah, again, so, you know, Huguenots and Jews ending up in Holland, all right, at the same time, being basically oppressed the same way. They had to flee, they had to practice their religion in secret, and then they had to fight for their freedom and religion, you know, just like, so there's a common thing here going on with the same people. Now, again, we're just going to go over the same information. I know this is Wikipedia, but just to get it in your head, the history of the Jews in Amsterdam. Again, Amsterdam has historically been the center of Dutch Jewish community and has had continuing Jewish community for the last 370 years. Amsterdam is also known under the name Mokum, given to the city by its Jewish inhabitants. Mokum is Yiddish for town, all right? So they're talking about what kind of Jews, all right? So it says here, Marrano and Sephardic Jews. Permanent Jewish life in Amsterdam began with the arrival. It began with what? The arrival of pockets of who? Marrano and Sephardic Jews. It wasn't Ashkenazi Jews. It was Marrano and Sephardic Jews first. At the end of the 16th and beginning of the 17th century, their first chief rabbi was Rabbi Uri Levi. Many Sephardic Jews from the Iberian Peninsula had been expelled from Spain in 1492 after the fall of Muslim Granada. Those that moved to Portugal were forced to leave in 1497, where they were given the choice between conversion or to Catholicism or death penalty on the grounds of heresy. From 1497, others remained in the Iberian Peninsula practicing Judaism secretly in their homes. The newly independent Dutch provinces provided an ideal opportunity for these crypto Jews to reestablish themselves and practice their religion openly, and they migrated most notably to Amsterdam. Now remember, this is an open Protestant place. Collectively, they brought in economic growth and influence to the city as they established an international trading hub in Amsterdam during the 17th century. All right, they established what? An international trading global network. And the hub was in where? In Amsterdam. Dutch. Who was over there? Jews and Huguenots. During the 17th century, the so-called Dutch Golden Age, they helped with the Dutch Golden Age. Perhaps the most notable example of Sephardic Jews in Amsterdam are the Kurimeo family, named Geronimo Nunez da Costa, alias Moses Kurimeo. All right, so the Costa, we already know that the Costas, we got some Irish da Costas who were actually Jewish. We got them in one of my videos, and they were listed as mulattoes in the census. All right, Irish mulattoes, Jews. Son of Jacob Kurimeo. All right, so these are Sephardic Jews, basically. In 1593, Marrano Jews arrived in Amsterdam after having been refused admission to Middelburg and Haarlem. These Jews of converso descent were imported merchants. They were what? Merchants and persons of great ability. Their expertise, that can be stated, contributed materially to the prosperity of the Netherlands. All right, they became strenuous supporters of the contender House of Orange and were in return protected by the stadtholder. At this time, commerce in Holland was increasing. A period of development had arrived, particularly for Amsterdam. So all this is increasing while the Jews and Huguenots are arriving, right? To which Jews had carried their goods and from which they maintained their relations with foreign lands. Quite new for the Netherlands, they had also held connections with the Levant, Morocco, and the Caribbean allies. Morocco. All right, who? Sephardic Jews and their allies in Morocco, making Netherlands prosperous.
All right, so we got, how they were controlling, the sugar plantations, how they came with Columbus, right? Remember Columbus, the Christ bearer, right? He brought only evil. Remember his ship left from a Moorish port, Palos, where there was actually a lot of Sephardic Jews living as well in Palos, which was a Moorish port. A lot of the Moorish blood in the veins. We got that already in a couple of references. Now again, just we're about to get into the Huguenots again. It has been asserted. This is the book History of the Conquest of Spain by the Arab Moors by Henry Copey from 1892. All right, Brigham Young University. It has been asserted that when the Moors were driven out, thousands took refuge in the south of France, who afterwards, abhorring the Roman Catholic persecution, became Huguenots. All right, and that these many emigrated at a later date to South Carolina. How did they end up in South Carolina? They were new Christians, right? So they embraced the what? The Protestant faith. All right, so now we get into this journal. We just read how they were, the Sephardic Jews were all over the trade, that was going on, especially with the sugar canes and all that and other products in the Caribbean and the Atlantic world. Huguenot merchants and the Protestant International in the 17th century. Same time, during the same time. The Protestant International by J.B. Bosher, the William and Mary Quarterly, Volume 52, Number 1, from January 1995, pages 77 to 102. Again, Huguenot merchants and the Protestant International. Remember, a lot of these Sephardic Jews were Protestants. They were just practicing that in secret, but they were secret Jews and Moors, cryptos. The Reformation of the 16th century created religious conflict in France that lasted for 2 centuries, and in some respects even longer. In the 17th century phase of this conflict, church and state made efforts to destroy the Calvinist heresy that had taken root in the kingdom. A vigorous Roman Catholic resurgence, the Counter-Reformation, gave these efforts great force. Consequently, several waves of emigration brought Huguenots to Protestant parts of Europe. The word refugee, again, the word refugee, just like the Sephardic Jews were being called refugees, was invented to describe them. Refugee was invented for the Huguenots. Some of them found their way to the English colonies of North America, particularly after the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685. By then, large communities of French-speaking Protestant refugees had gathered in the Dutch Republic. All right, they already were in the Dutch Republic. Why? And who was also there? Sephardic Jews, right? The Dutch. They brought prosperity during the same time, these Jews. And though the Huguenots were also going there, Huguenots possibly ex-Sephardic Jews, ex-Muslim Moors. So they're just meeting up with their ancestors, their cousins, their families that were already in Dutch there as Sephardic Jews. The first French church in London was established in 1550. The refugees who left France in the generations that settled in America were not only joining the Protestant colonies of English North America, but were also joining a cosmopolitan diaspora, a Protestant international, a diaspora, just like the Sephardic Jews and Moors, right? Merchants stand out as one of the more robust elements in the Protestant international. Merchants. Who was the merchants? Again, merchants, Protestants, Huguenots. It's the same titles. They're doing the same thing in the same places. All right, that book just told us that a lot of these Moors that were expelled from Spain and Portugal became Huguenots in France. You see how it all connects, right? Merchants stand out as one of the more robust elements in the Protestant international. They freighted ships. All right, who was also doing that? Sephardics.
and Moors with goods for sale abroad, sent sons and nephews across the seas and as agents in order to extend their trading circles, just like the Sephardic Jews were doing, and corresponded with foreign trading partners. Such business practices gave them international contacts stronger than those of the soldier and artisans of the Huguenot dispersion and different from those of the intellectuals. The correspondence of refugees such as Pierre Bayle, Pierre Jury, Jean Leclerc, and Jean Théophile des Aiguilles was abundant and full of ideas, a major part, indeed, of the early Enlightenment. Letters between merchants were humdrum exchanges of information about prices, commodities, and transactions, but behind them were family relationships. Family. Behind all those titles and tags was what? Family relationships, just like Sephardic research we just did about how they had their family connections all over. Same thing, the Huguenots, right? Who are these Huguenots that formed the heart of the Protestant International? The overseas business of Huguenot merchants flourished in the atmosphere of personal trust based on common religion and carefully foster relations of scattered families. What scattered families? From where did they originate? In France? Is that the origin of these people? They just came out of nowhere all of a sudden. They're Huguenots. Huguenots is a word that means confederate. We already got that. Huguenot means confederate, coming together, camaraderie, an agreement between a camaraderie, allies, the confederate. That's what Huguenot means. Posting a relative abroad as a trading partner reduced the risk of fraud, and all merchants, Catholic and Jewish as well as Huguenot, did so because they knew the difficulty of collecting debts. They all did so, right? But Huguenots were particularly well endowed with relatives abroad as a result of the persecution that drove them from France and from, before that, Spain and Portugal. Even after the decrees of May 18 and July 14, 1682, and several more in 1685 and 1686 made immigration a crime punishable by slavery and the galleys or even death. As persecution intensified during the 1680s, Huguenot merchants' colonies in Amsterdam, London, Rotterdam, and elsewhere grew larger than the foreign communities in French ports, and their numbers swelled dramatically after the revocation of Edict of Nantes by the addition of the merchants among the 150,000 to 200,000 new refugees. Until then, the mercantile part of the Protestant International had been largely composed of English and Dutch merchants, together with Walloons, refugees from Spanish Netherlands. These were Jews. They're talking about Jews. I ain't telling you in this article. They're calling these people Huguenots, but these are all, we just read all the info, right? Who was on these areas doing the trade and doing business until then? But the late 1680s were a turning point when the French element became substantial. Huguenots took an active part in the phenomenal expansion of the Anglo-Dutch and Anglo-American trade in North Atlantic. So Huguenots just basically took over their cousins, the Sephardic Jews' business, what they're saying to you. The diaspora of Huguenot merchants has been an elusive historical subject. This is partly because the records are scattered, do not fit easily into the national history of any country, you see? See how they don't make sense? Because these are Sephardic Jews and Muslim Moors, crypto converso Marranos, Moriscos. Historians tend to classify Huguenot merchants with other immigrants, and so to miss their essentially cosmopolitan character. Much Canadian American history treats the people who reached North America as though they had turned their backs on Europe, but the Huguenot merchants at least had not. Canadian historians usually ignore the Huguenots of La Rochelle and Bordeaux, who carried on much, sometimes most of the trade with New France, presumably on the ground that they were not Canadian. Alright, so I just wanted to basically read a little bit about this so you can see the pattern. They were involved, as they're called, merchants, Protestant merchants, quotes, right? What's a Protestant? What's a merchant? Who was really running all this stuff? We already got the info before this, all right? All right, I'm not going to read this whole. I just wanted you to see that there's a whole history here, you know, even individually, of where these people ended up in the islands and all that. Where they were started doing business. It says here, notes on the history of the Jews in Barbados. This is from the publications of the American Jewish Historical Society, 1909, number 18. If you want to read it. All right, so there's a whole story there. These are Sephardic Jews, again, mostly coming from Brazil. All right, they were, you know, fleeing Brazil. There's just another article. Sephardic trading connections between Barbados, Curaçao, and Jamaica, 1670-1720. Christian Seawick, University of the West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago. All right, Just to read this first paragraph, the Caribbean was not only the first region where the European invasion took place, but was also the first region of European trade in the Americas. From the early beginning of European economy in the part of the world, people of Jewish origin or Jewish background played an important role. The following lecture addressed the topic of Sephardic Jewish traders and their networks between the three Caribbean islands, which hosted big Jewish communities during the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. The years from 1670 to 1720 are classified as the period of the consolidation concerning Jewish settlements, as well as the Jewish trading connections between Barbados, Curaçao, and Jamaica. All right. So a lot of these came from Brazil when Portuguese took over the colony again. Ended up in these places. We already got that. So there's a whole study on individually and what happened there and their history there, so you can take a look at that. All right, I just want to show you this as well, so you can see there's a whole history. Every event there's a reaction, there's a whole history, behind everything that happens to these people, and their whole thing is like there's a whole paper trail again. So this is the journal, the Exodus from Brazil and arrival in New Amsterdam of the Jewish Pilgrim Fathers, 1654. All right, again, that's what the year the Portuguese took the Portuguese crown took over Brazil again. So they had to bounce a lot of those Sephardic Jews because the Catholics were in town again. So there's a whole writing on this. This is the publication of the American Jewish Historical Society, Volume 44, Number 2, December 1954, from the Johns Hopkins University Press. All right, so hope you're following so far along. So we got this other book right here. It's called Amsterdam's Sephardic Merchants. Merchants, the Huguenots and merchants in the Atlantic sugar trade in the 17th century. All right, Ida Schroeder. Now, I'm not going to read this whole book. It would take a lot of hours and days, and I just wanted to show you the contents of this book, what it talks about, so you can see the topics: the Atlantic sugar trade, Amsterdam's Sephardic merchants in the 17th century. All right. There's the development of the Sephardic Jewish sugar trade network. All right, the sugar trade, Sephardic Jewish people of color. All right, the West India Company in Dutch Brazil. The West India Company, right? Development of the Sephardic sugar trade network. Right here, the British Caribbean world, Barbados, the myth of the Dutch and the Seraphim movement. Right, so the Dutch and the slave trade. All right, what is the Sephardic? And what Dutch are they talking about, and their involvement in what slave trade, and who was doing it to who? All right, these all people of color, these white people, what's going on here? We're getting a better understanding, right? Amsterdam's Dutch and Sephardic merchants in the Atlantic supply trade and sugar trade in the 17th century. Evidence from freight records: Portuguese Jewish merchants in Amsterdam in the first half of the 17th century. Dutch merchants in trade with Barbados in the mid-17th century. Sephardic Jewish merchants in trade with Barbados in the second half of the 17th century. All right. The mission of Ben Ased Ben Israel and Cromwell's Western design. All right. The emergence of Sephardic merchant communities of Barbados, the London Sephardic and New Christian Community, the British Trade and Navigation Act, the Sephardic communities of Amsterdam, Brazil, and Barbados. All right. They were everywhere. Sephardic merchants and the second Barbados, Jamaica, the second Barbados. That was Jamaica. That's what they were calling it. Jamaica under Spanish rule and British occupation. Clandestine and legal trade of Port Royal, the Sephardic moment. All right, Port Royal was a Sephardic place, the emergence of Jamaica's sugar colony. All right, the Atlantic sugar trade in the end of the 17th century, the Sephardic merchant network, and Amsterdam's refining industry. All right, and then the appendix. So that's a lot of the contents. Just want to go to the way back in the all the way to 256. Is kind of towards the end, and it says here, conclusion. By the middle of the 18th century, several Sephardic Jewish agents and stockbrokers were working in London for correspondents in Amsterdam. Among them, and one of the more prominent, was Samson Gideon, the son of Roland Gideon, who had been a sugar planter and merchant in Barbados. A merchant. In order to understand the intricacies of the Sephardic Jewish business and trade network and assess the importance of their role in the Atlantic sugar trade and refining industry in Amsterdam, I gave a brief biography of the Gideon Abudiente family and their engagement in the sugar trade in the 17th and early 18th centuries. In the preface. In closing, I will reiterate the highlights of the family history, starting with Roland Gideon after he left Barbados and moved to London. All right, so real quick, we go to footnote number 76, a sugar planter in Barbados. All right, footnote says Charles Wilson's Anglo-Dutch Commerce and Finance lists over 30 Amsterdam Jewish brokers and agents working in London for Amsterdam correspondence between 1720 and 1780. Most of them were what? Sephardic Jews, the people of color, and many of the family names were familiar from the Winitzer, the Shilstone, and notarial freight records used in this study. Wilson suggests that in the re-export Anglo-Dutch trade, London Jews, or Marranos, dealt with Amsterdam Jews, and London Christians and Amsterdam Christians. All right, Christians, Protestants. It's talking about dealing with Protestants. All right, Huguenots. Samson Gideon became a successful financier and broker in the course of the 18th century. Samson is named along with Abraham Mokata and several other prominent Sephardic financiers as a precious metal broker for the British East India Company. All right, so a lot of these Sephardic Jews, all right, we're gonna see if you continue to study, they held a lot of stock, they had a lot of shares, they had a lot of involvement in the foundation of the East India Company and the Dutch West Indian Company. All right, these people that were supposed to be enslaving people in Africa, they were actually bringing a lot of these Sephardic Jews, a lot of their people over. They were transporting, they were doing this kind of trade, and nothing to do with Africa mostly. All right, it had nothing to do. It was mostly about this over here in these regions of the world, from Europe to America. The biographies of Roland Gideon and Samson Gideon form the red thread of the experience of many Sephardic merchants in the Atlantic world in the late 17th century. Not all merchants ended up rich, but many sojourned from port to port and island to island and justifiably deserved the designation of port Jew, which implies mobility, flexibility, and business acumen as referred to in Chapter 1 among the Sephardic Jewish merchants in the Atlantic trade, an intricate pattern of adjustment, development in response to the constantly changing political economic situations. No doubt, forced baptism, expulsion, and the threat of the Inquisition led to escape and migration, which became a pattern of response among new Christians and Sephardic Jews. New Christians, but offered opportunities. Following the defeat of the Dutch in Brazil, 1654, many Sephardic merchants returned to Amsterdam, but also began to expand their horizons westward. Their implementation of the British trade and navigation laws and commission trade offered opportunities to obtain denization papers in order to reside and trade with London and the British West Indian colonies, as well as with the Dutch colonies in the Caribbean. And thus, Sephardic merchants moved goods over long distances and often through multiple transit points. In fact, a cargo vessel might contain a variety of colonial products, including cacao, coffee, sugar, indigo, tobacco, and logwood, which were traded at various ports against wares brought from Europe or loaded along the way in exchange for colonial products for the return voyage. All right, just wanted to go ahead and show you this website I found. It actually from the WashingtonPost.com. This is one of their articles. And it says Jews, Slaves, and the Slave Trade, Setting the Record Straight by Eli Faber, New York University. All right, it says Chapter 1, English Jewish Merchants and the Slave Trade. All right, so now we're going to get into like how, because they've been all over the place. I haven't touched on the England, so I just wanted to real quick so you can see how involved they were. We got the background story now so we can relate to what you're saying in this article. All right, about the Jews in England, and it talks about how they were kicked out in 1290, and then they were able to go back, during Oliver Cromwell's, when they were getting expelled from Spain and all that, and from Portugal, and then from other places in Europe. It says by 1663, approximately 220 of them resided in London. They're talking about Sephardic Jews. Some in flight from the Inquisition came directly to England from Spain and Portugal. Others originated in the Canary Islands, France, and the German port of Hamburg, while still others came from Holland, a center of Jewish settlement dating only to the end of the previous century. They're letting you know where these different Sephardic Jews came from when they went to London. They were all over the place already. You saw that Canary Islands, France. All right, France, Huguenots. Virtually all trace their origin to the Iberian Peninsula. Even though they were from all these places, they all trace their origin from there, that's Spain and Portugal, as descendants of the thousands of Jews who had remained in Spain and Portugal after those nations had expelled their Jewish populations. Spain in 1492 and Portugal in 1497. Jews who decided to remain after the expulsion could do so only if they accepted Christianity. Those who stayed and converted comprised a distinct social group in the two Iberian nations called the New Christians, a category first created in Spain at the end of the previous century, following a wave of massacres and forced conversions in 1391. It was from the Jewish community in Holland that the resettlement in England began. Coping at mid-century with a surge in Jewish refugees from Spain, Portugal, and Brazil, the German states, and Poland, the leaders of Amsterdam Jewish community dispatched an emissary to London to propose to Oliver Cromwell that Jews be permitted to settle in England. All right, so all these Jews are Sephardic people, Sephardic Jews, people of color that were coming back from all these places. They were trying to resettle back in Holland, and it was becoming too many. So they were like, yo, England, can you take some? The resettlement was the result of his mission. As descendants of Jews who had originated in the Iberian Peninsula, the Jews of the resettlement in England belonged largely to the Sephardic branch of Judaism. Like I said, one of the two major subdivisions of the Jewish people. Members of the other branch, the Ashkenazim, originated in Central and Eastern Europe, and they too contributed to the resettlement, although in much smaller numbers. We ain't talking about them too much. We're talking about the Sephardic branch, all right? Further down, it says, because many of them were merchants, we're talking about the Jews that settled in London, who resided in the city of London, the country's commercial and financial center, where they participated in international commerce, the Jews of the resettlement well have been regarded as likely to invest in two slave trading companies, although in the Iberian Peninsula, the region where many of them, or their ancestors, had originated, they had barely participated in the enslavement of Africans. As Salo Whitmire Barron wrote of New Christians in Spain and Portugal who were accursed of superstitious adherence to Judaism. Continuing further down, it says, overseas, Jewish settlers became involved in slavery in Holland's colonies. Beginning in Brazil, seized by the Dutch West India Company from Portugal in 1630, Brazil attracted Jewish settlers in relatively substantial numbers. By the middle of the 1640s, approximately 1,500 Jewish inhabitants resided in the areas of northeastern Brazil controlled by the Dutch, where they established two congregations and employed the first rabbi in the Americas. Their numbers began to decline in 1645 when the Portuguese colonies arose in rebellion, raising the specter of renewed control by Portugal and the return of the Inquisition. 9 years later, in 1654, a Portuguese expeditionary force captured Recife, forcing the Dutch to abandon Brazil. When the Dutch left, the remaining Jewish population, approximately 650 in number, also departed, some returning to Holland and others emigrating to the Dutch colony at New Amsterdam, all right, that's New York, or to English one at Barbados. While in Brazil, between 1630 and 1654, a few of the Jewish settlers acquired sugar plantations and mills, and it is entirely reasonable to assume that they consequently employed slave labor. However, their contributions to the sugar industry were far more significant when it came to providing capital, exporting sugar, and advancing credit for slaves. As creditors, according to the historian of the Brazilian Jewish community, they dominated the slave trade. The creditors, who the Jewish Sephardic Jews, what dominated the slave trade. To be sure, all slave imports from Africa, Dutch the hijack, were in the hands of the Dutch West India Company, which under the terms of its charter held a monopoly to the slave trade. We're going to see who these Dutch were really enslaving. I've already showed it in past videos. I'm going to show a little clip later on. Again, just to remind everybody, just one. But the company sold the slaves they transported to Brazil at auctions where Jewish purchasers predominated, purchasing slaves and then selling them to plantation owners and others on credit. For the brief time they resided in Brazil, therefore, Jewish settlers were an essential part of the fabric of the slave trade, although the actual numbers of slaves they might have purchased and then sold as middlemen amounted to a minute fraction of the huge number of Africans brought to Brazil over the course of more than 3 centuries. All right, that's the hijack. Washington Post. What Africans? All right, so their involvement in the slave trade and all that, is deep. We're going to talk about who they were really enslaving towards the end of this video presentation. We got one reference. We're going to check it out. But before that, again, they were all over the place, even before they got to the North America. Now we're going to get into a little bit of the North America. It's deep. It says here, by chance or choice, Jews in New Amsterdam, 1654. So it's going to tell us a little bit about, New Amsterdam. That's New York, right? And already we're going to read, Huguenots were already kind of there, settling in. Yeah, Dutch Huguenots, French Huguenots, they were already there. But around these 60s, 50s, the Jews were getting there. So it says that in late summer 1654, two ships anchored in New Amsterdam. Roadstead, one, that's New York, right, arrived from Amsterdam. So one of them came from Amsterdam on or about August 22nd. The other, a Dutch vessel named Saint Katrina, is often referred to as the French warship Saint Catherine of Saint Charles, yet only the name Saint Katrina appears in original records. Having entered a few days before September 7th from the West Indies. We actually got the same ship leaving. We got the story of them, what happened, why they were had to leave from the West Indies, right? This is the other side of the story when they already had arrived in New York. The Periboom, Jan Pierce Kettle skipper, left Amsterdam July 8 for London. Soon after peace negotiations in April concluded the First Anglo-Dutch War. Following the short stay in the Periboom sailed for New Amsterdam, again New York, where passengers and cargo were ferried ashore as there were no suitable docks or wharves. Among those who disembarked were Jacob Barsimon, probably together with Asir Levi and Solomon Petersen. These were the first known Jews to set foot in the Dutch settlement, and with them begins the story of what community is New York, so-called, all right? It says here, the rise of this Jewish community parallels the rise of the Republic they're talking about in Holland. The histories of the Dutch nation and of Jewish society are remarkably similar. Dutch nation, who is the Dutch nation if it's similar? The Netherlands, a small country, geographically achieved greatness, while the Jewish community, small in number, also prospered and contributed significantly to the prosperity and growth of the country. In 1654, the arrival of the Periboom and the St. Katrina reflected the accomplishment and ambitions of the Golden Age, the largely Protestant Dutch nation. All right, so these Dutch nation and Jewish society are remarkably similar. Protestant Dutch and Jews similar. Protestant Huguenot Protestants liberate. The large Protestant Dutch nation liberated itself from Spanish Catholic domination by the early 17th century. After an 8-year war of independence, as mentioned, the Utrecht Declaration of Tolerance and Religious Freedom attracted Jews to the Republic. They began arriving sometime before the 1597. The first Amsterdam congregation, Beth Jacob, House of Jacob, was established. Its synagogue opened in 1614, joining two others formed in 1604 and 1609. It was not that authorities or the people of the Netherlands gladly welcomed these largely Spanish, Portuguese, Sephardic Jews, or the East European Jews who joined them, particularly after 1648, but it was generally recognized by those like Ulseliniks that members of this community, what community? Spanish, Portuguese, Sephardic Jews, what? They took part in the vital business activity of the East and West India Company's ventures, all right? They were heavily involved in that. That's what I'm telling you. People of color, these are people of color, and were among the earliest 17th century contributors to the prosperity of the Netherlands in general and Amsterdam in particular. Officials in Amsterdam made certain such important citizens were not lured to neighboring and competing cities such as Haarlem or Leiden. All right, so Jews in New Amsterdam, but I just wanted to show that, you know, the Huguenots are reportedly the first settlers in New Amsterdam, you know. So again, they're joining again. They're in the same places, going through the same things, you know, colonizing the same places. The Huguenots says here the first settlers in the province of New York. Again, New Amsterdam. The Quarterly Journal of New York State Historical Society says it has been generally supported that the Dutch were the only settlers in New York entitled to very much consideration at the hands of the historians, but the Huguenots were first in the field and formed a very important element both in numbers and influence. The history of the Huguenots in the province of New York began in 1622 when certain Walloons petitioned the King of England for permission to settle in Virginia. The petition was not granted. About 2 months later, certain Walloons, probably the same person, petitioned the States General Holland for permission to settle in New Netherland, and the request was granted. In the spring of 1622, the West India Company equipped a vessel called the New Netherlands, of which Cornelius Jacobs was skipper with 30 families, mostly Walloons. They sailed by way of the Canaries and reached New Amsterdam, where they became the first permanent settlers. The first white child born in province was of Huguenot parentage, right? So dodge the hijack with the, because they're saying Huguenots are white. We know better than that. All right, so again, we're going to get into it. These people eventually settled in New Paltz, New York. At New Paltz, the church organized has always remained, and records have been translated and printed in book form. The Dutch language did not supersede the French until about 3/4 of the century. After the settlement, the church about the time began affiliated with the Dutch. So these French Huguenots were basically settled in New Paltz, New York. We're going to get somebody's ancestor that comes out of there, and that would be the Dubois family. The Dubois family, they settled. Those are some of those Huguenots that settled in New Paltz, New York, New Rochelle. All right. So remember, you see a global market here. A lot of families connecting, a lot of people from different, a lot of people with the same cultural background in different locations of the world. And all these people, a lot of them are colonizing, they become settlers and prominent people in these places in America. Just want to show you another example here real quick. I'm in the Detroit Jewish News digital archives. All right, the Detroit Jewish News, and I'm in this page of this paper. Let me see, this is from the Detroit Jewish News, Friday, December 5th, 1969. Let me zoom into this part right here. All right, it says fascinating mulatto Jew, a mulatto Jew story in Marcus, New York. All right, it says in 1668, Boston reported the arrival and arrest of a Jew named Solomon. He was caught in the town of Wenham, Massachusetts, on his way to New Hampshire and Maine. His crime: he had profaned the Lord's Day by traveling on a Sunday. Who was Solomon? All we know is that he was described as a mulatto Jew, all right? But was he actually a mulatto? The Englishmen of that day thought of the Jews as a dark-skinned people. So why did the Englishmen of that day think of the Jews as a dark-skinned people? Well, we already got all the correlation. Well, we already know why. In 1665, 3 years before Solomon was hauled before the magistrates in Wenham, a respectable Portuguese Jew, I remember what they said about the Portuguese Jews, they were very dark-skinned. On Jamaica, a landowner was referred to as a black Jew. This Portuguese Jew was being referred to as what? As a black Jew. It is by no means improbable that the term mulatto was occasionally applied to Spanish Portuguese Jews. All right, mulatto was applied to them, Spanish Portuguese Jews, especially by people who had never seen a Jew before. Right, this doesn't mean they were African or mixed with African. It's what they're letting you know. Just being Spanish and Portuguese Jew will declare you a mulatto. It says, as late as 1733, a verse in an English drama ran as follows: "Farewell, Mr. Good Jew. Now I hate your tawny face. I'll have no more to do with any of your race." It says tawny people were dark-skinned people. Tawny, were dark-skinned people. Benjamin Franklin believed that most of the world was tawny. All right, Benjamin Franklin, we got that already. Remember, we got him his own words. He included in the category not only Africans, but Asians and American Indians as being what? Tawny or dark-skinned. Remember, Benjamin Franklin, we got the source in the past videos. Go get that drop. But also Italians. All right, Italians were dark skinned as well. French were dark skinned. Russians were dark skinned. Swedes and all the Germans except the Saxons were all what? Dark skinned. The French, Huguenots, French, Russians, Rus, the Mongols, the original Mongols are actually Russian aboriginals, indigenous people, the Rus. The Saxons and the English, he wrote in 1751, are the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. All right, so again, that was Benjamin Franklin they're quoting, all right, in this newspaper. Although Solomon of Massachusetts may well have been a white man of Spanish Portuguese origin, this is not to imply that there were not genuine mulattoes among the Jews of the generation. So again, they're like, well, he might have been white still. They just call him a mulatto. No, you don't know. You weren't there. You don't know him. You just want to say that might have been. That means you don't know. May well have been. That's a lot of probabilities and conjecture right there. Newspaper. All right. The fact is, he was labeled a mulatto Jew at that time. The people at that time called him a mulatto for a reason. But they're also letting us know in this newspaper not to imply that there were not genuine mulattoes among the Jews of that generation. Jews in the West Indies and in Dutch Guiana fathered many mulatto children who reared in the Jewish faith. All right, so they're trying to explain why they were mulatto. But again, all right, we already know these people are already dark skinned. All right, so again, just to continue with Solomon Franco, just want to show you what type of Jew they're letting us know here in the Sephardic community of Greater Boston. So it's SephardicBoston.com website. It says history, Sephardic community of Greater Boston. The Sephardim, the first Jewish community to reach America in 1492. The first, all right, with Christopher Columbus, have been living in Boston for over 350 years. They arrived there on the same time as the city of Boston was incorporated in the year 1630. Spanish and Portuguese Jews, we already know what they mostly look like. Escaping the Inquisition and persecution, settled throughout the English colonies, regaining their freedom of religion and building their homes and businesses. The first documented Jew in Boston was Solomon Franco, a Sephardic Jew. All right, Solomon, the guy they will call him mulatto, the guy that we know they were labeling as mulatto in that newspaper. He was a Sephardic Jew from Holland. The Dutch who had arrived there, Sephardic Jew from Holland, were arrived in 1649. Among the famous patrons living in Boston was Moses Michael Hayes, a Portuguese Sephardi, also what? A swarthy person. He and his family left Newport for Boston ahead of the British attack in 1776, at the time that Boston was devastated by the physical and financial effects of the American Revolution. For the next 3 decades, Moses Hayes and his family would play key roles in establishing the financial and cultural institutions that would define post-revolutionary and 19th century Boston. He opened a shipping office in Boston and was among the first merchants. Again, merchants, they got the mercantile business going. They are the merchants, this global network, there to underwrite shipbuilding, trade, and insurance to newly opened Far Eastern markets. In 1784, Hayes becomes a founder and first depositor of the Massachusetts Bank, still doing business today as part of the Bank of America. All right, who? A Portuguese Sephardi person of color, so-called black man, black Jew, so-called Sephardic Jew. All right. He was an honorary member of the Boston Marine Society and founder of the Mass Mutual Fire Insurance Company and the Mass Marine Insurance Company. Moses Hayes was also active in a variety of civic projects. He donated to subscriptions to beautifying the Boston Common, to building bridges and turnpikes, and to Harvard College. All right, so he played a prominent role. A little further down, it says in the 1870s, through the turn of the century, there was a group of primarily North African Sephardims who held Sephardic services in Zion's Holy Prophet of Israel, the Alfred A. Marcus Orthodox Synagogue in Boston's South End. They were using the Torah scroll dedicated by the famous Sephardic philanthropist Sir Moses Montefiore. All right, we know all these people of color because the Sephardis, we already got the drop. All right, most of these people were swarthy. As the Jewish community started to migrate to the suburbs of Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, so did the Sephardim. They continued praying in the synagogues on Blue Hill Ave. All right, now anybody from Boston, I grew up there. I grew up in Dorchester. Today, Roxbury, they call in these suburbs. They were meant because the downtown area, this is colonial times. So downtown area was downtown Boston, and right outside of that was Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, and other communities. Today, they're not suburbs. This is the hood. Today, this is the neighborhood. These are generally what you would call so-called black communities or communities, minority communities, right, in these areas, even though there is people that are pale-skinned living in these areas too, but the majority, and it has been known as the ghettos, right, in Boston. So again, the Blue Hill Avenue, famous, if you know about Blue Hill Avenue, that's the hood. And so again, where they end up, all these Sephardis from North Africa, they ended up on the hood.
I'm sorry. I was muted this whole time. So basically, what I was saying this whole time I was talking, I did it again. Kyo. Yeah. So first of all, what I'm showing here is, I guess I'm dropping some, I guess, sneak peeks of what I'm going to be talking about next in this Nations of the World. These two covers, these two books have some great information. I wanted to talk about this Sephardi thing right here. This is what I was missing in my presentation earlier that got cut off, so I just wanted to continue. And I know it's a lot of information. It might get boring, hard to concentrate, hard to pay attention, but there's a couple of details here that I wanted to emphasize on. And it's just, global network, because they, when they telling us history, they want us to think, oh, some, Europeans came, some Dutch came, some French came, some Jews came, and you know, what is what Jew? They wanted us to picture a specific type of Jew, and they don't want to tell us the background story. That's why we got to stop generalizing. We can't just keep like saying one people is one thing, like saying Dutch is this, Dutch is that, because Dutch can be very broad too, just like saying American. Not everybody that's called American is the same thing, and not everyone that's calling themselves American is an indigenous person to America. So, it's the same thing. You can't say, oh, the Dutch are this, the Dutch are that, or well, I know this. Well, you got to prove it. You got to show the resource why you came up with that. And so, this is part 5, Nations of the World. If you haven't seen part 1, 2, and 3, we go deep when we're talking about like these nations and these areas. There's a lot of history there in Holland before the Jews got there. So yeah, I understand. It could be, you could be right, could be part. I just wouldn't generalize. There's a whole history in all these areas. I just wanted to go ahead and point out, in general, there's nobody that's going to be able to say, well, you're making this up, because there's a general consensus that these Sephardic Jews, Moorish Jews, they were Swarthi. All right, you ain't gonna, but you ain't gonna prove me wrong. You're gonna, you're gonna try hard, because that's the truth. In that area, we all know, and we know the history. The Moorish Empire was there for so many hundreds of years, and the Jews, Sephardic Jews, are related to these people. They prospered a lot, during that area. They were rich, wealthy, and you see there was a whole history after they got expelled together. There's, they're going to different countries, becoming different things, tags. Again, Huguenots, it's not a religious thing. It's not just saying, oh, French Protestant. It's more than that. Again, the word means confederate, to come together, camaraderie, take an oath together. Hey, let's do this together. So what were they before they got there? Who were these people? You got to study deeply each line, each person. And nobody's going to be able to do that. At least somebody here on YouTube trying to say, oh, well, you're wrong. Well, at least show me how I'm wrong. You gotta go deep. So hope everybody enjoyed these last 2 videos. I'm gonna continue with these videos I got in front. These 2 books I got in front of me. All right, just bear with me. See if I can. All right. So yeah. I guess this turned out to be part 5. For me, it's pretty late. Again, I'm not gonna spoil the rest of the parts. It's got some good info coming. Again, this ain't to make people look bad, and this wasn't really about talking about bad about like Sephardic Jews or anything like that, because you might be surprised. You never know if this is in your genealogy too. All right, so each person has to do their genealogy. I already got a lot of confirmations that the research that I'm doing people are contacting me and letting me know, hey man, everything you've shown is that's my family history. I got all that. I got the whole story. You're right, confirming it. So it's not just me reading things in books and just putting things together from websites. It's more than that. Hopefully you guys have, those of you who've been here long, seeing that it's just a journey. We're learning, we're putting things together, and there's a more correct history. So it's not about complexion, really, because these are swarthy people, so-called black people. All right, and something happened where there's a shift, and all of a sudden everything's whitewashed, and then we got scapegoats all over the place. We got a lot of scapegoats, you know. But doing your genealogy, doing real research, we'll see that there's a whole different story. Hopefully, you guys will be able to see. That's what I was trying to show. All right, so before I go, just want to thank everybody that was tuned in tonight in the two parts. Even though they tried to cut us off, we just kept going. They just helped me out because now I got two videos. Maybe that was good that it wasn't so long. Maybe you guys can catch both parts. Make sure to catch part 4 right before this. I got cut off, so make sure you get that because we went over a lot of information. We showed a lot of references to them being Swarthy, a lot of references to the studies of people referencing these people, calling the Portuguese Jews basically very dark, black, and so who are these people? We might read something historic and be like, well, there was some Dutch colonists here that came to this town, and well, next time you read that, try to understand what kind of Dutch is that. What kind of French are they talking about? There's a whole history behind that person. All right, you can't just generalize because you hear the word Dutch. You think you know what they're talking about. All right. So everything's we're digging on everything with surfing. Much love and respect to everybody who's doing the same. If anybody feels like I'm copying them or anything, it's not really like that, because I think if we all going towards the truth, then eventually we're going to start talking about the same thing, right? If we're talking about the truth and there's only one truth, then eventually we're going to start talking about the same thing. All right, so I appreciate all the teachers out there. I'm a student. I ain't trying to be nobody's master teacher. I just want to show what I understand, overstand in my research, and I think it helps out to visually get these things together like this in presentations, so you can come back to it, you can reference it, you can show it to others, you can share it. And some of these things are hard to get. It takes time, a lot of research sometimes. That I don't mind doing. So I think that I like history, and I like to know things correctly, more factually than just fairy tales and school textbooks that are basically biased and one-sided. All right. So again, past the cultural beliefs and your cultural background, your doctrine, eventually we all students, man, we gotta keep learning. You can't get stuck in one thing. All right. So this was the Dutch Moorish Sephardic Atlantic trade. And you saw, what I wanted to show too is eventually these people had their hands in the West Indian Company. All right, East Indian, West Indian Company. All right, we already know in history what they were doing, what they're notorious for. All right, I mean, I already shown it with the Spanish and Portuguese were really enslaving in a lot of my videos, and now you see that they were bringing themselves. They were using their ships for themselves a lot, bringing their Sephardic people over. I noticed that. And bringing their trade back, the sugar. They were bringing their own people to work them. There's a whole history there about Black Latinos, the Latinos or the Black Latinos. You can research that and how they were being sent to Hispaniola and all that. And a lot of those Black Latinos were rebels because they were Moorish Sephardic Jews that were against the Catholic crown, and even in the islands they were being persecuted, so they would run away. And a lot of them mixed with the Indians, and are being referenced as the what's called the Maroons. The runaways, so Maroon runaways. So it's not just Indians, it's not Africans. It's deeper than that too. So it's a combination of a lot of things. So that's what we're trying to dig on. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. It's late for me. I'm gonna go ahead and end it right now. But much love and respect. All right, Hawa.